Welcome back to Mideast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's press review, where today we will be looking at the Pope's visit to the Holy Land. Jamal Kanj writes a piece for Redress Information and Analysis, which is titled, "Which Israel is Greeting Pope Francis?" The writer questions, is it the official diplomatic fanfare and public relations machine parading Israel's religious tourism, or the unofficial welcome decorating Palestinian churches in Jerusalem with slogans like "Jesus is garbage" and "Mary is a cow"? Would it be the apartheid highways and byways dedicated exclusively to Israelis, or the high separation wall cordoning original Christian and Muslim Palestinians inside the city that cuddled and protected the baby more than 2,000 years ago? It is highly unlikely Pope Francis, like other Christian tourists, would face the same military barriers that recently blocked the descendants of the first Christians and Western diplomats from performing religious services at the church in Jerusalem. For the Jews-only state of Israel, the other Christian and Muslim religious sites are archaeological tourist attractions belonging to prehistoric peoples, just like the pyramids, structures built by the long-gone pharaohs. Jamal Kanj says, ironically, Israel continues to court doomsday international Christian tourists while stifling the resolute few original Christians by expropriating their land, as it did for the town of Beit Jella to build the Jews-only colony of Shiloh. The Hebrew neo-Nazis, quoting Israeli writer Amos Oz, are welcoming the Pope with a smashed cross at Tabqa Church near Lake Tiberias, and threatening the life of Catholic Bishop Giantoboulos Marcuzzo if he doesn't evacuate the land of Israel. The anti-Arab Jewish hooligans are able to vandalize Christian and Muslim sites with impunity because Israel doesn't want to end it. These hated crimes are not being carried out only by outlawed fanatics. About 2 years ago, elected Israeli Knesset member McHugh Ben Ari tore the Bible in the middle of the Knesset. He insolently dumped it in what he described as the garbage can of history. Kanj concludes this is the real Israel which Pope Francis and Western Christians need to discover, the heirs of yesteryear's King Herod and today's tormentors of the unwavering 2,000-year-old gods of the Church. The Pope should challenge Israel to allow Palestinian Christians to go back to their original homes and abandon churches and end all restriction on religious freedom. Also on the subject, the Telegraph features a piece by Robert Tait titled "Pope Makes Surprise Visit to Israel Victims Memorial After Separation Wall Controversy," where after prompting Israeli anger at his impromptu visit to the barrier, Pope Francis visit memorial for Israeli civilians killed in Palestinian attacks. Robert Tait argues that the Pope Francis, quote, bowed to Israeli pressure on Monday to visit a terrorism victims memorial after criticism of his impromptu prayer session at the West Bank's controversial separation wall. The unscheduled stop at the memorial to the victims of terror and Jerusalem's Mount Herzl was prompted by Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, and followed barely concealed Israeli anger over Sunday's high-profile prayer event in Bethlehem. Pope Francis lays a wreath in the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. This was in the spirit of "don't get mad, get even," a high-ranking Israeli official said. If the Palestinians are using the Pope entering Bethlehem to convey purely political messages, we will get even. Yes, there's a wall, but why is there a wall? The pontiff's stop at a concrete wall section of the barrier sprayed with anti-Israeli graffiti provided a compelling image of his 3-day trip to the Holy Land. It was seen by Palestinians as an endorsement of their view of the barrier, a mixture of wall and fence that snakes through the West Bank, and a symbol of oppression and a means of grabbing land they want for a future state. But Israeli officials protested furiously that the event, captured in photographs that went around the world, handed the Palestinians a political propaganda while failing to explain Israel's argument that the barrier was designed to stop the infiltration of suicide bombers. The Pope then visited the memorial shortly after laying a wreath at the tomb of Theodor Herzl, the founding father of modern Zionism. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "I want to thank the Pope for accepting my request to visit this memorial. I explained to the Pope that the establishment of the barrier he visited yesterday has prevented many more victims of Palestinians that continue to this very day, and that Palestinian terrorists were planning and continue to plan. Netanyahu's comments reflected a belief among Israeli officials that the pontiff's visit to Bethlehem had been hijacked by the Palestinians for propaganda purposes. And one high-ranking official told the Telegraph the Pope had been manipulated into stopping at the barrier. There is a general feeling that this was a well-prepared propaganda event into which the entourage of the Pope brought him without thinking about the meaning or about how it would be interpreted. We definitely blame the Palestinians. And now we are joined by Mr. John McHugho, chair of the Lib Dem's Friends of Palestine. Thank you very much for being on Press Review.
My pleasure.
The Pope's prayer stop to the separation at the separation wall in the West Bank was seen by Palestinians as an endorsement of their view of the wall as a symbol of oppression and a means of grabbing land they want for a future state. But how do you see this?
Well, put it this way: the Pope's gesture at the wall by praying, touching the wall with his head, and obviously being in deep communion with God, can only be interpreted in that way. And there, namely that it is a symbol of oppression. And there is an important piece of background here which I would draw to your attention, which is that since the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church has endorsed the human rights movement. I've just been looking at a Catholic website where it says, human rights are simply given by God. They are not taken by the state or by any human being without giving offence to God. Now, in international law, there was the International Court of Justice in The Hague has looked at this in its advisory opinion, and that wall ought never to have been built except if it was built along the border between Israel and Palestine. It wasn't. The wall is a symbol of oppression. It is illegal under international law, and it gravely breaches Palestinian human rights in all sorts of ways. Therefore, the Pope was doing no more than stating the obvious when he said it was a grave, well, I don't know what he actually said, but, people are quite entitled to take the Pope as acknowledging that the wall itself is a symbol of oppression. Another point, of course, is that it divides Bethlehem from Jerusalem. And that is obviously wrong, because Christians from Bethlehem are not allowed free access to the Holy City to go to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Muslims from Bethlehem are not allowed free access to the Holy City so that they can go to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In other words, this ought to be uncontroversial to most people. And I actually think, having looked at the report by Robert Tait in the Daily Telegraph, that the people who have politicized it are actually the Israeli government. They say they are upset, but they had no right to be upset because the whole world is upset with this. I think Pope Francis, in his uniquely tactful way, was trying to bring this home to them. That's what I would say, in a way that couldn't possibly cause any offence.
Why do you think the Israelis protested, arguing that the Pope has been manipulated to stop at the wall for propaganda purposes? And one high-ranking Israeli official told the Telegraph, "We definitely blame the Palestinians."
Well, I think they would say that, wouldn't they? I don't know if there was any agreement over the Pope's itinerary with the Israelis and the Palestinians, but the Pope was indisputably on Palestinian soil, so what he does there is, strictly speaking, none of the business of the government of Israel. The problem is that the right-wing elements that dominate the Israeli coalition government refuse to accept many Palestinian human rights. And by drawing attention to those human rights, of course, Pope Francis will have made himself unpopular with him. So I think that when he went to see the victims, the memory, the memorial to the victims of terrorism,
Yes.
which, from what I've been able to find out about it, is something aimed at commemorating specifically Jewish victims of terrorism. I don't think the Pope could have had any objection to doing that because terrorism is terrorism.
So do you think...
But he did say, and I looked at the clip on the Daily Telegraph website, he did say when he was there that he condemned he condemned terrorism and he prayed for all victims of terrorism in the world. He was not just praying for Israeli victims of terrorism, but all victims. And that, of course, would include Palestinian victims. And let's not forget, there have been many Palestinian victims of Israeli terrorism too.
John, do you agree with the author of the Telegraph piece that the Pope...
I'm sorry, you're very faint.
Do you agree with the Telegraph reporter, that the Pope, quote, has bowed to Israeli pressure to visit the memorial site?
I haven't a clue. You would have to ask people who were in the Pope's entourage. I mean, if this was an unscheduled change to his route, there must be a reason for it, and it's quite likely that it would have been a change made at the last minute. It may well have been at the request of the Israelis. It sounds likely, it sounds logical. But, I would say in reaction to that, so what? The Pope prayed there for all victims of terrorism throughout the world.
One last question.
He is the Pope. That is his job.
Yes. One last question, John. Do you think the Vatican, if they could choose, do you think they would believe they would be much better off under a Palestinian Jerusalem?
What, a Palestinian Jerusalem than an Israeli Jerusalem?
Yes.
Well, let me go back to the question of human rights and international law. These are subscribed to by the Catholic Church in a very powerful fashion. And so the Pope and the Church would be supporting the position under international law and in human rights. And let's look at Jerusalem briefly. Now, the old city of Jerusalem and the rest of East Jerusalem is under Israeli military occupation. It is not and cannot be Israeli sovereign territory unless the Palestinians cede parts of it to Israel. Now, there may well be land swaps and all kinds of arrangements in a final peace treaty, but pending that, the situation is a military occupier using force. Israel's only right to be in East Jerusalem is based on force. And that is not a right has nothing to do with human rights. And that situation will have to change if there is ever to be peace. So to come straight to your question, would the Vatican prefer it if it was under Palestinian control? I think the answer is that the Vatican would want there to be a comprehensive peace agreement. I know that's what the Vatican wants, between both parties, which respects the rights of both sides, and that definitely means an element of Palestinian control. It also means an element of mutual recognition and respect for the holy sites of each side. These things still have to be agreed, and they should be agreed at arm's length on the basis of the rights of the parties, not on the basis of the force imposed by a rather cruel and vicious occupier.
John McHugh, also the author of A Concise History of the Arabs. Thank you very much indeed for your remarkable participation.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. That was it for today. Thanks for watching.